On December 10th, Australia made history as the first country in the world to ban children under 16 from social media. Starting at midnight, platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube were ordered to block minors from their sites or face millions of dollars in fines. Just before the new policy took effect, the Australian government released a staggering statistic. 86% of kids ages 8 to 15 were already on these platforms. That meant hundreds of thousands of young users were booted off immediately. So, what pushed Australia to take such a drastic step?
The reason for its existence is because of many significant incidents that have happened in Australia that has resulted in death of young children. So young people who have suicided as a result of online engagement. So the social media ban was put into place there to try to avoid that from happening in the future.
That's Susan Grantham, a lecturer in communication and researcher at Griffith University in Australia. Her work focuses on the effects of social media on young people, an issue that's been under growing scrutiny in the country. In 2023 alone, Australia's e-Safety Commissioner received tens of thousands of reports involving minors on major platforms. In these cases, connections have been found between social media and teen suicide, specifically involving cyberbullying and content that promotes self-harm or disordered eating. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is urging young people to see the ban as an opportunity to break free from screens and instead spend more time with friends outside or try a new hobby or sport. While leaders are optimistic, experts say that for this legislation to really be successful, it requires cooperation and enforcement from social media companies.
Well, a very important aspect of the legislation is that it does not penalise parents or children. So there's not an onus upon parents to block children's access to these platforms. There's no fines or sanctions or whatever. The onus is on the platforms to be able to verify the ages of their users.
That's Terry Flew, Professor of Digital Communication and Culture at the University of Sydney. Under the new law, platforms are now required to use age verification systems, which can include identity checks or third-party tools. Flew says that some adolescents are using virtual private networks, or VPNs, to get around the new restrictions, while others have started using smaller, more niche platforms not covered by the ban. And for researchers like Grantham, that's where the real concern lies. Instead of pulling children off social media altogether, she warns that the ban may just push them into digital spaces with fewer rules and less oversight.
That's always been my biggest fear with this particular proposal, is that it doesn't stop young people from engaging in social media or engaging in online activity. All it does is push what we already know is happening to a location that we can't monitor as quickly and clearly, particularly if young people go through those VPNs and go to very, very dark places where we don't even know that they're migrating to. That makes it very, very problematic. We've also got to remember that these are teenagers. These are not people that cannot get around technology. They have the means to actually get around technology. And if they want to, they will.
Grantham also worries about what the ban could do to kids who already feel isolated or alone. While she acknowledges the negative effects social media has for mental health and body image, she says there can be positive impacts too. In certain cases, she believes social media can provide connection, community, and support for young people who may not find it elsewhere.
So we've got to remember that Australia is a very unique continent where we are mostly around the coastline, but we then also have towns and regional centres where young people do, exist. They do live, but they're not necessarily living with a bunch of other young people. So we're potentially isolating them from the connections that they've made with others in other parts of Australia or the world. So there's that issue. There's also the isolation of minority groups. So, queer, for instance, is one big one. So young queer kids who have created their community in these online spaces have had to find other ways to keep that connection. And that's very problematic when we're talking 13, 14, 15-year-olds, where they're in quite an emotional, hormonal state anyway. To remove that connection has been a huge concern of ours.
Despite these fears, Grantham is clear about one thing: something had to change. As lawmakers work through the kinks of the new policy, she suggests a new kind of requirement for teens turning 16 who will be returning to social media. Formal education on how to navigate these platforms safely and in healthy doses. Think of it like driver's ed. Before you're handed the keys, you learn the rules of the road.
Social media was the Wild West of the internet, and this has really put on the map that something needed to be done. So that is a huge positive. We've gone in the right direction. We've got young people really now thinking about their online interactions. But at the age of 16, we're then just handing these young people the keys to social media. You know, and I've often said we don't hand young people the keys to a car when they reach the age that they're allowed to have a license. We expect them to get a learner's permit. We expect them to do 100 hours on the road. We expect them to do a test before we deem them safe to be on the road. So we need to treat this very similarly, and we need to ensure that we are embedding education processes into teenagers' lives so that when they hit 16 and get handed the keys to social media, that they actually are prepared for what they're going to experience, because the problems that existed on social media are not going away. All we're doing is pausing their exposure to it.
Although the ban has been a big change for the country, its future is still uncertain. The law is already facing two big legal challenges making their way through the courts. One has been filed by a major social media platform affected by the ban, and the other comes from two Australian teenagers who argue the legislation infringes on their rights.
It may not survive the Australian courts. So there are two cases being taken against the ban. One is notionally being taken up by two 15-year-olds who claim it infringes their implied right of political communication. Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights, but there's a legal precedent around what's referred to as an implied right of political communication. It would be an interesting legal question as to whether that applies to under 16s, and that's being supported by a group called the Digital Freedom Project. The second hearing, and the two will be concurrent, is coming from Reddit. And Reddit are saying that they are not a social media platform as outlined in the legislation. This is a more technical issue, I would say, around what constitutes a social media platform. Those matters will go to the federal court and possibly to the High Court.
Regardless of the court's decision, the ban currently has strong public support. Polling shows that between 60 and 80% of respondents agree with the new social media legislation. Although it's worth noting that the respondents in this poll are all above the age of 18. Zooming out, this support is gaining global attention while countries like the UK, France, and the US have long debated how to regulate social media and early adolescent use. Most proposals have focused on parental controls or content moderation. Australia's approach goes much further, raising the question of whether other governments will follow and if these platforms will cooperate or fight back on a larger scale.
Companies are unlikely to make major responses just because changes have happened in Australia. They may make some changes at the margin, and actually all of the companies have committed to acceding to the laws with differing degrees of reluctance. So I think the question would be whether an idea like this takes off in other countries. And there's definitely discussion going on, particularly in Europe, Denmark, France, Norway, the UK being examples, also in countries like New Zealand and Malaysia, about introducing similar laws. So I think the question would be whether companies feel obligated to engage in greater forms of age assurance and age gating of content. And I think for that to happen, it would require these measures to be taken up in more countries than Australia.
To learn more about this topic and our guests, Susan Grantham and Terry Flew, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on X, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galante. Our executive producer is Amirah Zaveri. Our studio managers are Jason Dickey and Jay Silvers. I'm Gary Price.